Dark Souls 3 isn't Dark Souls 2. It's part of Dark Souls 1, with some inspiration from Bloodborne, for better and for worse. The level design is top-notch, even though the world itself is rather linear, and the gameplay is a lot faster paced, but also a lot more button-mashy. Dark Souls 3 doesn't bring a whole lot new to the table, and despite being the final entry in the series, it leaves many lore questions unanswered. It is mechanically the weakest game in the series, though it does get many other aspects right. My first playthrough of Dark Souls 3 only took 35 hours, which is saying something, since my first playthrough of the previous game took upwards to 100 hours. I missed like 2/3 of the entire game, and would probably have missed even more had a friend not pointed me in the right direction. I thought it would be a good idea to go through the game as blind as possible for a change, but in retrospect that's something I would not recommend. I wish I knew how good the S-Stock was, or how borked the poise system is, where all the upgrades materials were, and just how essential co-op is. Dark Souls can already be a pretty frustrating experience at times, and adding more layers to that can easily cause you to go hollow in real life. One issue that tainted my entire first playthrough was a constant hitching issue. Every other minute or so, the game would briefly freeze twice in a row, making precise movements and hits absolutely impossible. I eventually resolved this issue by installing an older Xbox control driver, but there's still plenty of other bugs to complain about. For example, like 1/3 of the time when I'm summoned, animations completely stop working and nothing poses any threats because of it. Only solutions are either to wait for it to pass or black crystal out. Other bugs include being unable to enter boss door, randomly getting the message "you lack the license for this DLC" before being booted back to the main menu, backstab animations triggering without actually backstabbing, enemies getting stuck in walls, and the list goes on. There was one time when me and another phantom couldn't see or hurt the boss at all, so we just stood there gesturing and clapping like sarcastic assholes while the host did all the hard work. And the boss fights are something I've constantly heard hyped up as being the best in the series. Why, I do not know, because every single decent fight is rife with flaws. Take the Abyss Watchers, for example. The fight is supposedly a homage to the best boss in the trilogy, but is compromised by multiple enemies that are infinitely respawning, is split into two phases, and the second phase leaves lingering flames. Other fights suffer from being very button mashy or just being straight up gimmicks. I guess what people mean is that the boss fights are the best on average, which is technically true I suppose, but anyway. The combat in this game feels exaggerated and cartoony, and combined with a faster pace, it almost disguises how incredibly button mashy it all is. Since both enemies and players alike stagger just by looking at them hard enough, combat usually breaks down into who can hit first, rendering most of the weapons available challenging to use at best and utterly worthless at worst. But hitting first is no guarantee you'll win the fight. Certain enemies have so much health you have to empty your stamina bar into them several times over to kill them, making PvE an absolute chore. Summoning phantoms help, but it gives enemies more defense and makes it more likely you'll be invaded. Invading is the worst it has ever been. Since invasions prioritize worlds with summons in it will constantly feel like you're getting ganked, and instead of your bloodstain conveniently being placed where you stood while invading, it is instead placed where you died. So you have to fight your way through the same infinitely respawning enemies just to retrieve the souls you've acquired every time you die. And if you didn't like being invaded in previous games, you're gonna want to play Dark Souls 3 in offline mode, since invaders can and will now chug Estus, meaning fights drag on for bloody ages. It's like they were determined to make invasions miserable for everyone. Co-op isn't all that great either. When you are summoned, you get half the maximum amount of Estus you have, which simply isn't enough for PvE in the early to mid game. There's also no small white sign soapstone, so you really have to commit to your summons, and you pretty much have to summon because of all the invaders. If you yourself want to be summoned, it doesn't matter if you succeed or not, since you don't get either your Estus replenished or your durability restored. Not that the latter makes a difference. If you've honestly ever come close to running out of durability, then congratulations, because you are the only one. And as for the Covenants, they're thoroughly half-assed. Watch Dogs of Farron and Elders Faithful does the same, but for different areas. Blue Sentinels and Blades of the Darkmoon does exactly the same, gank invaders. Not even the rewards are unique. Rosaria's Fingers is generic invasion covenant, with respecking and cosmetic surgery awkwardly spliced in there for no good reason. Mound Makers is a genuinely good idea for a covenant that was really badly executed. Mound Makers are basically wildcards that can either help you or fuck you over, but since you only get reward for killing another player, most people play it as a straight invasion covenant. Way of the Blue is exactly the same as it was in Dark Souls 2. Warriors of Sunlight is the old covenant worth a damn, since it gives an increased summoning rages and has the added benefit of prioritizing worlds that already have hostile phantoms present while you yourself are invading. There was a 9th covenant added in the second DLC that functions like the old monk fight from Demon Souls, which is a fun idea for a covenant if a little tricky to balance. Joining and leaving covenants is the most casual it has ever been. As soon as you get a specific item, you can place that item in the dedicated covenant slot in your inventory and BAM! You're now in that covenant. While this does make it convenient, it completely removes any feeling of loyalty, dedication and commitment, not to mention how easily abused it is. For example, if you have discovered Way of the Blue, you can simply join that covenant after you get invaded and still get help. The infusion system is pretty much ripped from Dark Souls 2, though it has also been massively expanded. The new heavy infusion makes weapons scale better with strength, the sharp infusion makes weapons scale better with dexterity, the refined infusion makes weapons scale better with strength and dexterity, and it's also the most powerful infusion by far. There's a simple infusion, which is basically like the magic infusion, but it also gives a trivial amount of FP over time. The blessed infusion is like the simple infusion in that it gives a small amount of health over time, but it also adds a physical damage based on phase scaling. The Deep Infusion removes all scaling and adds dark damage, and the last new infusion is the Hollow Infusion, which adds scaling based on luck, which is the new stat in this game. And these are just new infusions. From Dark Souls 2 you have Raw, Fire, Lightning and Dark, as well as Crystal, which is just a new name for magic, and the Chaos Infusion is like the Fire Infusion from Dark Souls 1. The last two are Blood and Poison. The Blood Infusion basically trades damage rating for bleed build-up, and since triggering blood loss only deals damage, it doesn't make much of a difference in the end. In practice, all it does is prevent you from enchanting your weapon with Carthus Rouge, so you're better off not bothering at all. The Poison Infusion reduces your physical damage and scaling, but if you manage to poison someone and can wait 3 minutes, it will automatically waste your time. Despite all the new options added, only Heavy, Sharp, Refined, Raw and Hollow are viable because all the other ones prevent you from enchanting your weapon. But even of those 5, Refined is still way superior in terms of damage. If there will ever be a Dark Souls 4, there will probably just be a checklist of what you want the weapon to scale with and what damage it will do. But I digress. Dark and Hexes strike a weird balance between Dark Souls 1 and 2. Hexes aren't a separate category, but is instead split between all other forms of spells, and dark spells only have a single requirement but still deal dark damage and scale with faith and intelligence. Pyromancy is also scaled with faith and intelligence but has both faith and intelligence requirements, so while the mechanics and tools in the game doesn't allow for a particularly viable or fun hexer build, you can still make a pyromancer that dabbles in dark. And I run out of interesting talking points. Like I said, Dark Souls 3 doesn't bring a whole lot new to the table, but here's the rest of the things worth mentioning. There's a new stat called Luck that makes you do more damage with hollow infused weapons, and it also increases your item discovery. Why would they make a stat dedicated to that? Because Dark Souls. I suppose it also does make you inflict bleed and poison faster by 0.0000. You can change the way you look at any point in the game and also save character presets that can be applied to any character, and while you can't technically change your sex, you can make it look like it. That is, if you don't mind some mental scarring. Related, you can reallocate your stats but only 5 times. If you try doing it a 6th time, you have to play the rest of the game as a slug monster. There's a magic bar now, or I guess I should call it a focus bar, that depletes every time you use a spell and weapon skill. It doesn't regenerate automatically, but you can restore some by swigging from your Ritalin bottle prescribed by Androided Blacksmith. There's a new skill mechanic that gives you a special ability with most weapons at the cost of some focus points. Some skills just give a boring buff, but others give you an interesting or hilarious attack. You can use a password for co-op now, and doing so bypasses the level tiers by scaling your character to the host's character. There's a lot of jump scares, like a lot. Seriously, there's one area in particular where the game pulls the same shit like 5 times, and when it isn't a jump scare, it's either an ambush or a mimic. There is one point where the game stealthily spawns an enemy behind you. It doesn't aggro from a corner or drop from the sky, it straight up spawns. There's a new damage type called Frost that is basically like Bleed from Dark Souls 2. Kinda surprised to see there's no infusion for it, not even in the first DLC. The wikis have very little information, although that could be because I got the game relatively early. I had to use the Fextra Life wiki for a change. I would rather tolerate some bullshit and actually get some bloody information than go to Wikidot and be told that dark is a type of damage that the player and enemies are affected by. Yeah, thanks Wikidot. There's no power sound system like in Dark Souls 2, though there are certain weapons that comes in pairs. And lastly, the drop rate for infusion gems is absolutely abysmal, which greatly limits the amount of exploration you can do with infusions. And that about marks the end of this review. Overall, I feel like Dark Souls 3 is the weakest game in the series, but I would be lying if I said I wasn't having fun with the game. Like a commenter on my last video so succinctly put it, Dark Souls 3 looks like a marketing maneuver to appease the fans by throwing everything they loved about Dark Souls 1 all together and poorly mixing it up as if it was made by a fanboy, and to add to that with some heavy inspiration from Bloodborne, because why not, right? I'm still hopeful there will be a remastered version like there was with Dark Souls 2 and that addresses some of my major complaints with the game. And who knows, maybe they'll even remember to turn on poison this time.